Los Angeles. A city where neon signs mingle with glamour, promising young dreamers success that is always on the horizon like an alluring mirage, but never quite achieved. For Evan, 21, who had recently arrived from a quiet suburb on the East Coast, the city seemed like an open gateway to a new life of opportunity. But the reality, as it turned out, was nowhere near as vivid as he had imagined. He had to find a job that could make money quickly. Student loans, apartment rentals, all of this was beginning to weigh heavily on him. He tried to work as a bartender, handyman, even thought about modeling, but the money was not enough. One day, after a long and exhausting day at work, his friend mentioned something unusual: an elite escort agency. It's not just dating women, you know? It's working with the upper echelons of society, said Mark, one of those who was already in the business a few months ago. Evan thought for a moment. He was taciturn but attractive, with sharp features and a masculine bearing that immediately caught the attention of the audience. It could be successful in this area. And oddly enough, it seemed like a way out. The agency Mark had introduced him to specialized in meeting wealthy women, many of whom were much older than he was. Evan agreed. It was a risky move, but he saw no other choice. His first assignment was unexpectedly simple. A woman named Miss Leslie, well into her 50s, met him in a luxury hotel room in Beverly Hills. She looked stylish and well-groomed, and although there was a hint of loneliness in her gaze, she maintained an air of confidence. Evan did it easily. Compliments, companionship, light touches, and when the evening was over, he knew he could keep doing it. But that all changed a few months later, when he got a call from the agency with an unusual offer. The client was a lady who preferred to remain incognito. Evan agreed without further questions. For him it was just another job. Another opportunity to earn money. Hotel room as usual. Evan came in a little early to get ready. As soon as the door opened, a woman appeared in front of him. She was clearly in her late 60s, but her figure and bearing were still dignified and confident. She was dressed in an elegant dress, and her hair was neatly arranged. But something in her face made Evan freeze. "Come in," she said softly, her voice deep but with a familiar note. She smiled, her lips trembling slightly, and motioned for him to come in. Evan felt a strange surge of excitement. He felt like he'd seen her before, but he couldn't remember where she was. Perhaps she reminded him of someone from the past, but he couldn't sort out his feelings. The woman spoke calmly and introduced herself as Anna. Her touch was soft but sure. Even though the meeting was supposed to be simple and professional, something about it was starting to make Evan inexplicably drawn. Evan leaned into her, and their lips met in a kiss that was both gentle and deep, like a long-awaited confession. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapped around her waist, and she felt her entire body respond to his touch, as if it had finally found a lost part of itself. His hand slid down her back, sending up light waves of trepidation, and he parted the strands of her hair slightly, leaving a kiss on her neck that made her stifle a sigh. His every movement, every gesture, was filled with concern and sincerity, as if he wanted to capture this moment of intimacy that they shared not only as a man and a woman, but as people whose paths were reunited after many years of love. He slowly slid his lips over her skin, leaving a faint trace of warmth, like a light silken breeze caressing the delicate petals of flowers. Anna closed her eyes, lost in this dance that was both familiar and new, feeling his presence in every cell. His touch that was gentle and insistent, as if he wanted to express to her all the things that he couldn't say in words. Evan slowly but surely moved lower, leaving traces of kisses along her collarbone, shoulder, feeling her trembling and the quiet thrill that he awakened in her. His hands explored her body with a quivering intensity, as if they were studying a map where every point had a special meaning. She could feel him slowly working his way along her curves, and each kiss was like a soft surge of warmth, seeping into the depths of her being. She allowed herself to forget everything, to lose herself in his arms, as if she were on the edge of reality and a dream. When he touched her thigh, slowly running his hands over her, she felt a wave of warmth that seemed to rise from the very depths of her being, spreading all over her body. Evan gently slid his hands along her skin, and his touch was both light and deep, filling her with waves of pleasure that reminded her of the calm sea slowly caressing the shore on a warm summer day. His lips brushed her stomach, and each time he kissed her, it made her want him even more, as if he was revealing something inside her that she had kept hidden for a long time, not daring to trust anyone. Evan took his time, his every move deliberate like the work of a master creating a masterpiece. He was returning to her lips, and there was a passion in their kiss that they had both allowed to unfold only now. Every touch, every gesture, gave her a new response, evoking long-forgotten sensations and feelings that she had once hidden behind the barriers erected by her past. Now all those barriers were gone, and she gave herself up to this moment, allowing herself to be vulnerable, open, real. Their night became a symphony of feelings, caresses, and kisses, each of which told its own story, conveyed its passion, its sincerity. Evan, as if sensing her every desire, followed her breath, her movements, their bodies merging into one, as if connected by an invisible thread that drew them together. They melted into each other, oblivious of time, oblivious of everything but the bond that held them together in that moment. And as the morning dawned on their tired but happy faces, Anna knew that this night would remain with her forever, as a secret memory, as their shared, intimate revelation. The night spent with this woman was filled not only with physical intimacy, but also with something deeper, the feeling that something more was emerging between them. When the meeting was over, Evan went outside and breathed in the cool night air of Los Angeles. His mind was in turmoil. This woman, her eyes, her touch. She awakened something in him that he couldn't describe. It had been a day since they'd first met, but the woman Evan had spent that time with had never left his mind. Every time he thought of her, a strange feeling of fear would come over him. She was more than just a client to him. Her eyes, her manner, everything about her seemed so familiar, but he couldn't remember how he knew her face. Even though they only had a working relationship, Evan felt their bond grow deeper each time. Her presence in Evan's life was becoming increasingly important, even though he was trying to keep his feelings under control. These meetings filled him with a new, strange sense of security. She wasn't like any of the other women he'd worked with before. There was something special between them, something that made him uneasy. One day they met again in the same hotel room. The evening started out as usual, quiet conversations, light touches, but this night was different. Evan sensed that she was about to say something important. Her eyes shone with a kind of sadness, as if she had been carrying a secret for a long time that she was finally ready to reveal. They lay side by side on the soft satin coverlet, their bodies entwined, their breathing still labored from their passionate act of love. The woman was lying with her head on his chest, and Evan could feel her visibly tense, as if she were struggling with her thoughts. "Evan," she began softly, her voice trembling slightly, as if it was hard for her to speak. He shuddered. It was the first time she'd used his first name, which was rare for clients. It sounded intimate and meaningful. He looked at her, his heart racing. "Have you ever wondered why I chose you?" she asked suddenly. Evan didn't know what to say. He never thought about it, even though he always felt that their meetings were special. He shook his head slowly, propping himself up on one elbow to get a better view of her face. "You remind me of someone," she continued, her eyes fixed on something far away, as if she were going back in time. "Someone I lost years ago." Evan listened intently, feeling his inner unease grow. It was as if her words had stirred something in his memory, but he couldn't catch what she was saying. "When I saw you for the first time, it was like I went back. Time has lost its meaning," she smiled, but it was a sad smile. Evan sensed that this woman was hiding something very important to her. His mind raced, but he couldn't find the answer. It was a teacher," she finally confessed, and at that moment Evan felt his heart stop. These words echoed in his mind. Teacher. Something inside him froze, as if his mind had suddenly pieced together long-lost pieces of a puzzle. He stared at her face, and gradually memories began to surface from the depths of his mind. That smile, that voice, those eyes. Hunt, he whispered, as if in disbelief. The woman nodded silently. Her eyes filled with the emotion she had been hiding for so long. Evan was stunned. It was his high school teacher. The same woman who was his first inspiration. The first person he respected and looked up to with admiration. In the quiet of the hotel room, the dim light of the street lamps filtered through the thick curtains, shrouding everything in semi-darkness. Evan sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the woman in front of him. He still couldn't quite believe that this was Miss Hunt, his teacher, the woman he had once respected and felt a youthful affection for. But now, at this moment, there was something completely different between them. Something forbidden, impossible, yet alluring, like an inexorable force of attraction that neither of them could ignore anymore. Miss Hunt, whose real name was Alice, looked at Evan with eyes full of the very memories that had been hidden in her heart for so long. Her hands trembled as she gently touched his cheek. At this moment, all the barriers collapsed. Age, social norms, and the past have all lost their meaning. They were just two people whose fates had crossed again, but in a different light. Evan leaned in slowly, and their lips met again. This kiss was completely different. Deeper, more sensual, filled with all that they were hiding inside of themselves. Alice responded with the same passion, as if this was the last moment they could be together. Her hand slid down his bare back, his muscles tensing under her fingers. The warmth of her body sent a bright wave of desire coursing through him. Alice, despite her age, radiated such an amazing attraction that Evan couldn't help but wonder. Their kisses grew more passionate, more heated, as if they were trying to make up for all the time they had missed in the past. Evan could feel her nearness, her breath against his neck as she pressed softly against him. His hands, cautious at first, became increasingly bold. He ran his fingers over her skin, gently brushing her neck, shoulders, and down her back. Every time he touched her, she gasped slightly, her body responding to his every move. She was looking at him, and there was not only passion in her eyes, but also what was more important, a deep, emotional release. Evan could feel it now. Their bodies spoke to each other in a language that didn't require words. He slowly laid her on her back, and his lips began to travel over her body, starting at the soft neck and moving lower and lower. Every breath she took was filled with pleasure, and with every touch he felt their bond grow stronger. Alice relaxed, trusting him completely, her fingers twisting in his hair as their passion reached its climax. Evan moved slowly, feeling her every move, her rhythm, trying to prolong the moment. He stared at her, admiring the way her face changed under the influence of pleasure. She, too, couldn't take her eyes off him. They were closer than ever before at this moment. When their bodies joined, it wasn't just a physical act. It was a moment of total emotional release, when each of them felt something more than passion. Alice sighed, her body arching beneath him as a wave of pleasure rolled through her. It was the moment when all their feelings, emotions, and everything they had been holding back burst out. They moved together, blending into a single rhythm, their breaths intertwining to create a melody filled with passion and tenderness. Evan could feel her every breath reverberating through him, her hands tightening on his shoulders. He was consumed by a desire that could no longer be contained. As their intensity reached its peak, Alice moaned his name, her body shuddering in a final burst of pleasure. Evan felt a wave of his own wash over him, engulfing them both. They froze, their bodies entwined, their hearts beating wildly in unison. At this moment they were one, two people connected not only physically but also on a deeper level. They lay side by side, their breathing gradually calming, and their bodies, tired from their passion, finally found peace. Alice turned to face him, her face peaceful, her eyes no longer filled with the sadness that had haunted her all this time. "I was afraid of this," she whispered, touching his face softly. "I was afraid to admit that I was thinking about you all this time." Evan looked at her, his heart still racing. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" he asked softly, stroking her hand gently. "I couldn't," she said, her voice weak but honest. "You were a student, and I was a teacher. But a lot has changed since then." They lay in silence, savoring the moment that was their last, the moment that brought their souls together in more than just physical intimacy. It was a moment when all their worries, doubts, and fears dissolved into that calm, giving way to the real connection they had been hiding inside for so long. Evan was lying on his back, his arm wrapped around Alice's shoulder, and her head was resting on his chest. Their breaths were quiet, peaceful, and it felt like time had stopped. He could feel her warmth, her calmness that filled every corner of his mind. "You were something out of reach for me," Evan said softly, looking up at the ceiling, as if speaking not only to her but to himself. "I thought you were in my past, that everything that happened didn't matter." Alice slowly raised her head and looked up at him. Her eyes, filled with tenderness and the years that had passed since their last meeting, met his. "We never forget those who have touched our hearts," she replied softly. "You were more than just a student to me. You were always something more, but I couldn't afford it." Evan felt her words seep through him, as if they were opening old wounds, but with a new understanding instead of pain. He no longer felt embarrassed or guilty. They both became different, and this moment was what allowed them to get closer on a level that wasn't possible in the past. "It's different now," he said softly, touching her face gently. "Now you're not my teacher, and I'm not the same boy I was at school anymore." Alice smiled at him, and there was something liberating about it. "Yes, you're right," she said. "We've changed, but I'm glad fate brought us together again." They continued to lie in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. And even though the future was unclear, they both knew that this moment, this joining of their souls and bodies, was something that would stay with them forever. It was getting light outside, and the first rays of sunlight were beginning to break through the curtains. It was the morning of a new day, symbolizing a new chapter in their lives. Evan and Alice locked eyes, and without words, they understood each other. This moment was their last farewell to the past, and the beginning of something new that they could not even imagine before. The quiet morning filled the room, and Evan kissed her gently on the forehead. "I'm glad we met again, as strange as it may be." Alice nodded softly, smiling, and snuggled up to him again, knowing that this moment, this connection, would live on with them, no matter where their lives took them. If you like this story and want to hear more exciting and intriguing love stories, be sure to subscribe to our channel. There are still a lot of hot, sensual stories ahead that will not leave you indifferent. Click on the bell so that you don't miss new videos and share your thoughts in the comments. We always welcome your feedback.